Hi, and welcome to the top 5 acrylic painting questions and answers, and my answers. This is recorded live on Monday, May 14th, 2018. I am Nancy Reyner, your host for this 90-minute presentation, and thank you for joining me. I'll start with a brief introduction. I am a painter and a teacher, and I'm really passionate about both, which I've been doing for many years. I wrote several books on acrylic painting, one of which was the #1 best-selling painting technique book in the country for several years running. I was also a technical consultant for Golden for many years, and I've been teaching workshops here in Santa Fe and across the country. So in my workshops, I noticed that very often the same questions would pop up for artists. Today, I will be sharing what I found to be the top 5 most commonly asked questions that came my way and my answers to them. So now I'm going to do something called share my screen. I'm going to press a button and you will be able to see my screen, which has the first slide of my PowerPoint with the title, Top 5 Acrylic Painting Questions and Answers. So we'll just go to the first question. Here we go. So first question, #1. Believe it or not, I got asked this a million times. How can I make acrylic look and feel like oil? So, while preparing my answer for this presentation, it suddenly hit me. This question has an odd perspective. Why would we want to make one medium act like another? Especially in the case with acrylic, which can not only imitate any other medium, but it has so much more potential to create effects beyond any other medium. And then I remembered I actually asked this exact same question myself many years ago when I was in art school. I couldn't find a picture of me in art school, so this was the closest I found to something that reminded me of being in art school. When I was getting my BFA, then later my MFA, oil paint was the required medium. None of the teachers or students used acrylic. And actually, if you can believe this, there were no health and safety regulations at art schools then. So even at my undergrad school, Rhode Island School of Design, who prided themselves on being forward-thinking, they did not have any health and safety regulations in place. Now, currently, schools must legally comply with safety regulations. So most, if not all, art schools have switched to requiring the use in classrooms of acrylic, but that was after I graduated. So years later, after art school, I decided to switch from oil to acrylic. The first thing I did was to force the acrylic to work the way I was used to working with oil. It was a bit frustrating until I tried an experiment. And here's what I did. I painted the same still life, this one and then this one, twice. I painted one with oil, this one, and the other in acrylic. What I learned from this experiment, which I highly recommend, it was really, if you're used to one medium and you want to switch to another, it's really fun to do the same image with 2 different mediums. I learned a lot, and what I learned was that oil and acrylic actually can produce the exact same results: color, surface quality, brush strokes, and sheen. Yet, to get them to look the same, I had to paint them differently. And these are the things that I'm going to share in this presentation. And oh, I have to show you. I actually, time out. I actually have them here. So here they are. Not big, but it was a good experiment. Let me go back to sharing the screen and back to our PowerPoint. Okay. So after I did this experiment, I had a big aha moment, and my work changed dramatically. I realized that now that I knew how to make acrylic look like oil, I could just let that go. And instead, I began handling the acrylic paint in a way that went along with its natural properties. And in this way, I discovered acrylic could produce unique effects that other mediums couldn't even come close. Here's an example of something that I've recently done to show what I'm talking about when I refer to acrylic's unique effects. Switching to acrylic enabled me to transition from realism to abstraction. and also more easily obtain interesting textures, both of which I was interested in at the time when I switched from oil to acrylic. This painting emphasizes surface qualities, as you can see. Here's another example of the unique effects possible with acrylic. This uses pouring techniques. And this is acrylic on a silver leaf. And this is acrylic on gold leaf. As my work shifted to more minimal, the ease that acrylic offers to create textural qualities was a huge plus. Okay, so let's go back to our first question and my experiment. Oil and acrylic paints actually have many similarities. If you're comparing the same high quality paint brands, high quality oil paint to high quality acrylic, they're both going to use high quality pigments and high quality binders. Now both binders, oil and acrylic, they dry clear. So theoretically, if they're using the same pigment and the binder dries clear, they should look the same in a painting when dry. There are, however, some differences between these two mediums, and to get them to produce similar images, as I said before, I needed to use different processes and techniques for each. So, sorry, I'm drinking some water. So I discovered there were 3 things that allowed me to imitate oil in feel and appearance using acrylic. And these are working in layers, enhancing refraction, and slowing down the drying times. So let's look at each of these separately, starting with the idea of layers. So first thing I'm asking, what is a layer? This appears to be a fairly simple question, but it does seem to trip up a lot of us painters because the word is used in a variety of contexts. So let's just say, to keep it simple, a layer is one thing applied over another. Usually something wet applied over something dry. However, it can also be something wet applied over something else that's wet. So let's just take this sandwich, for example. And those of you that know me, I always use food for analogies. I don't know why, but if we look at the sandwich, it makes layering, it just makes a lot of sense. The idea of layering. If we start with the base here, the bread, this looks like pretty good bread, then each item added on top is its own layer. So mayonnaise, then eggs, then tomato, then finally the sprouts. So that's 4 layers, not counting the bread. But let's say I take all these ingredients, the mayonnaise, egg, tomato, and sprouts, and put them in a blender to make some kind of weird pesto. Then I apply that pesto on the bread. I would call that 1 layer. And it's the same with painting. So here's an example of layering an acrylic painting. So here, number 5 is the final result on the right here. So if we start with number 1, this was a simple background. And then here I applied titanium white because I eventually wanted to do yellow, a yellow lemon, and yellow's a light color, and it would be transparent and it wouldn't look nice and bright. So I do this underneath, and then I put the yellow on top in number 3. Now I would not do this with an oil painting. It just would be too messy. But here I could, each layer dried before I applied the next one. In number 4, what I did is I took each of these 3 colors, the green, the yellow, and the purple, and I mixed. So with the green, I mixed, say, 5 or 6 variations of green, 5 or 6 variations of yellow, and the same with the purple. And I do what I call a color strategy. I just put the colors down in sort of hard-edged little swatches to indicate for me, I want to go from dark to light, or I want to go from, here dark to light, or warm to cool. And I give myself a color strategy. And then over here, for the last layer, I use the same colors here for my strategy, but here I repainted them with soft blends. So each layer gives me the chance to do one thing and then eventually build up to the finished painting. Here's another example of layering. The painting on the left here was created over a surface of dried glass bead gel. And then over here, I poured a medium over it to smooth over the beaded texture, so I could apply more paint like here and here in a new layer over a smoother surface. Just a different idea of layering. So, okay, here again are the 3 ways to make acrylic look and feel like oil. We talked about layering, and now let's talk about refraction. Not to get overly scientific, let's just say refraction affects how a color appears to us as it is seen through a medium. And if we take rocks, for instance, if we look at the rocks on the left here, they're wet, they're in the water, and the water adds a brilliance to their colors. It adds a refraction. But as the water dries, the refraction is gone. They lose that color and that color intensity. So oil and acrylic mediums do the exact same thing as what water does to the color, except when oil and acrylic dry, it keeps the color. It keeps the enhancement of the color. Now, I believe that oil, and I'm talking about gloss mediums. If you're using matte mediums, you're going to be doing something different. But gloss oil, gloss acrylic are going to do what water does here. Now, I believe that oil and acrylic differ in this matter ever so slightly, ever so subtly, and that refraction appears to be slightly more intense with oil. So to remedy this, we can do 3 things to enhance refraction. And again, refraction is what the water did to the color. It's acting like a medium when it's wet. So here we can add gloss mediums and gels into colors. We can apply gloss mediums or gels as isolation coats. That's a coat just by itself over a painted layer when that paint is dry. And we can also apply a final gloss varnish at the end. And you can even do all 3 of these suggestions for maximum color richness. So for that bottle still life that I did, the acrylic version that I showed in the beginning, I actually added gloss medium into the paint and also applied a final layer of gloss varnish, but I did the gloss varnish on both the oil and acrylic versions. And the final result was that they looked exactly the same. So let's head to our 3rd concept to making acrylic look and feel like oil, and that would be drying times. And actually I discovered that, well, oil, I discovered that this is actually one of the second main question that I get asked is, how do I slow down the drying of acrylic? Oil naturally dries slow, while acrylic naturally dries fast. So I had to slow down the drying of the acrylic paint in that bottle still life that I showed earlier, and in the final step of that lemon painting that I showed as well, to make the soft edges in the blends easier. So this brings us to question number 2. What a great segue, right? Is that how can I make acrylic paint dry slower? So the fast drying nature of acrylic makes it easy to get hard edges. When we slow down the drying times, we can work slower, which is sometimes a benefit. We can leave the paint out without worrying about it drying. We have more time to mix complex colors. We can blend and create soft edges, and it also helps to get, all of these things help to get that look and feel of oil. So the first most important thing, easiest thing I think, to make acrylic paint dry slower is to think about climate, to think about your studio environment. The more humid it is, the slower the drying. So if you add a humidifier and you keep your temperatures on the cool side, you're going to have a lot more open time. In other words, a lot more time where your paint is wet. By the way, a good rule of thumb is that any aspect of acrylic, any adjective you can think of about acrylic can be changed and customized for your needs. That's drying times, that's consistency, that's opacity, just about anything. Okay, here are So other than climate, here are 6 ways to slow down the drying by customizing your acrylic paint. So let's start with add retarder into your paint. Now, a word of caution here, retarder is not a medium. It is considered an additive. So that means that when you start adding additives into your paint, you're playing chemist and you're changing the paint chemistry. So this means there's a limit to how much retarder you can add into your paint. You need to limit it to 15%. 15% retarder into your paint. If you add more than 15%, it may never dry. A general idea is to think about retarder allows the paint to stay wet about 3 times as long as it normally would take to dry. So in everybody's studio, in different places with different climates, the same, say, tablespoon of paint is going to take an hour in one place and 3 hours in another. But when you add retarder into it, you're increasing that baseline time by 3. So if it's normally 1 hour drying time, you'll have 3 hours drying time with the retarder. Okay. Now, the second idea is to use a slow drying acrylic paint line. And I wanted to talk about Golden's open acrylic paints because they're pretty unique. There's a lot of other acrylic brands available that are called slow drying acrylic, but most of them are just adding more retarder. And there is a limit to how much, as we just talked about, how much retarder you can add. So the most that those paints can stay wet is maybe they push it to 5 or 6 hours, 5 or 6 times as much, sorry, instead of 3 times as much. But what Golden did is they created their open line of paints is actually a new polymer that they invented. So normally acrylic paints dry from the outside in. So if you picture that tablespoon of paint, it's going to dry on the outside of that lump of paint, and then eventually takes a lot longer for the inside to dry. But with the open paints, they changed that around. They made it with a polymer that dries from the inside out. So it stays wet for 24 hours on your palette or more. And it's pretty interesting. So if I'm doing plein air painting, I'm going to use the Golden's open acrylic instead of just trying to do the rest of these ideas. That's just going to give you the maximum. Now let's look at our third choice, which is to add a slow drying medium to your paint. Now we've got the acrylic glazing liquid, and also when I mentioned up here the open paints that have that slow drying quality to them, they come with a medium, and you can mix and match. You can mix the open paints with the regular paints. So that open medium is a pretty nice slow drying medium, and you can try adding that to your regular paint. Then we have this idea of wet and wet, working with paint into a slow drying medium. So if you took retarder, which again is an additive, not a medium, but if you took retarder or a slow drying medium, either one, and applied it onto your surface wherever you want to work, you can then apply your paint color into it. And as it works into the retarder or the slow drying medium, you've got more time to work and blend and create soft edges. It'll just slow down the drying altogether. Now, instead of slow drying mediums, you can also, or working wet and wet into the medium, you can also use a gloss gel. A gel generally is a thicker, it's a medium that has gone through a thickening process. So you're going to get texture. It's a thicker medium called a gel. And if you like texture, you can slow down the drying by adding the gloss gel into your paint. As I said here, you can also put the gloss gel down first and then work the paint into it. And then we can always add up to 20%. If you add up to 20% water, you can add a lot more, and that's actually one of the questions, is working with water and acrylic. But if you add up to 20% water in general to anything, it's not going to affect the color or the consistency, but it will help to slow down the drying. So now we go to our third question. Now, don't forget, when I finish this PowerPoint presentation, we're going to have lots of time to ask me questions. So I'm moving from question to question, but you can always type in the chat box if you want me to clarify something I said. And when I finish my PowerPoint, I will look at the chat box and I will answer as many of those as I can. But let's look at question number 3. What is the best way to paint soft edges and blends? So if you notice, the first 3 questions are all related to each other. And part of my theory is that that comes from folks like me who were trained as an oil painter and now, want to try to replicate that. But we need soft edges and blends. We need to be able to slow down the drying of acrylic regardless of what we're painting. Okay, so the best way to create soft edges and blends is just first slow down the drying, which we just covered. And then there's some tips to blending that I want to share with you. I happen to have a short clip, it's very short, just a couple minutes, from a larger video that I made. It's a brand new 30 video acrylic painting course that I just made, like 2 weeks ago I finished it. I'm still celebrating. So here we go.
Here is an example of 2 colors together in a sort of a ground sky, or just 2 colors together with a hard edge between them. And here I have softened it slightly, and here I've softened it all the way. It almost looks like an airbrush look. How did I do that? So I just wanted to show you how I did that. So I'm going to start with the first board that has the 2 colors, the purple and the brown. And I'm going to prop it up. And I have these 2 colors pre-mixed. One of my favorite things to do with acrylic is mix my own custom blend. I put a little water. I start with the heavy body paint, little water, little acrylic glazing liquid. So it's a little slow drying, not as long slow drying as the open paints, but shorter, but long enough for me to get a nice blend. And so I swatch the tops with the actual color. The first thing I'm going to do is pick a soft, flat brush, and I'm going to pick this one. It's soft and flat, and I'll be able to work with this edge here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I already have a hard edge placed down, and now I'm going to dip into this paint, and this paint, again, it has water and acrylic glazing liquid to slow down the drying a little bit, and I'm just going to put it right here at the edge. Now notice there's a difference between this color and this, and that's just because this is wet and this is dry. So that's why I mixed the color in a jar and used it as the background, and now I'm using it to smooth this out. I know that it's the exact color, so I only have to put it here. If I didn't mix this exact color, I'd have to repaint the whole thing. I'm going to take the paint off the paper towel, get rid of the paint in the water, get rid of the water. It's very important to get rid of the water. If I take water and add it to here, it'll turn into a wash and start to swim. And I'm using an opaque painting technique here for the blend. Now I go into this purple, and I'm not being skimpy with the paint. I'm really applying a nice thick layer of paint. And it's good I propped it up so that I can go all the way out. Again, I'm going to wipe off the excess paint on the paper towel, get rid of the paint, and I really jam my brush down into the water, get rid of the water. Now I use this flat brush without any paint and without any water, so that I'm going to run it right along this edge. The edge is right going to be in the middle of these bristles. And you can see I go like that. Now I'm going to go back this way. I don't want to flip my brush because then I'm flipping the color. So I'm going to go back this way, and I'm going to, oops, I think I just did that. I'm going to go back and forth. And I do this 2 or 3 times, letting it dry each time to get it nice and soft. So there it's pretty soft. and I'm not going to work it to get it perfect because it's already starting to get a little tacky. That's when I stop. I'm going to smooth out this lump right here, and then I'll let it dry. I can quick dry it with a blow dryer or let it dry, and then I can just keep doing the same thing over and over. However, when I do my next layer, I am going to, that's still wet, so I'm not going to work on it, but my next layer, I actually start a lot further out from the edge, and I do the same exact thing that I just did, but I'm not right on the edge. I start right here. And then I take one and I just move it all the way up to the other and move it all the way back here. Now in this case, this is just the second layer, so you can actually see the hard edge there. But if I did this technique when this is dry, I would get this final airbrushed look where you have just the total hard edge is gone. It's all soft. So as a suggestion, take a couple of colors like this and pre-mix them and try what I did. Start with a hard edge, let it dry, and then apply the paint again right at the edge. Use a nice flat soft brush and see if you can come up with a super soft edge.
Okay, so back to our PowerPoint. Now, so here's my first technical glitch. I've somehow put a red line here. I have no idea how to take it off. So I'm sorry about that. We'll just have to live with that. But, you know, this has been interesting. I'm learning something new each time. Okay, so that was the, you know, just an idea of how to get some soft edges and blends. And just a brief comment here. I mentioned in my introduction that I worked for Golden as a technical consultant. So there's no surprise in the video. I'm demonstrating using Golden products. And not because I'm trying to endorse Golden here, but because it is what I use for my own work. So feel free to experiment with the ideas I'm presenting and substitute other brands if you prefer. But all of the video clips I'll be showing in this tonight's presentation are going to have Golden in it. So now, boy, I wish I could get rid of that red line. I'm sure there's a way to do it. I don't know how I did that. That's kind of cool, though. I'll have to learn how to do that. All right, so question number 4. How can I save money? And I have another clip to answer this, so I'm going to play that.
Always good to know some ways that you could save money because, as you know, as an artist, we have a lot of things to buy. We have surfaces and paints, so why not find out some ways where you can save money in the paint category? First, you want to buy the best paints possible. You don't want to buy cheap paints. Cheap paints can turn yellow. When you mix them, they get muddy, and they may flake off the painting eventually. It's better to start with good quality paint and use some of these tips that I'll show you to save money later. So the first thing is that when you spend money on paint, you're mostly paying for the pigment. The pigment, and good quality pigment, is expensive. So if you remember, we talked about binders, mediums, gels, and pastes. Those don't have pigment in it. So per volume, compared to, say, a pint of cadmium red compared to a pint of a gloss gel, the gloss gel is going to be a lot cheaper. It just doesn't have that cadmium pigment in it. So using mediums, gels, and pastes in addition to your paint is going to help you save money. And you might think, well, if I add mediums, gels, and pastes, I might reduce the quality of my color. But no, if you're using good quality binders, you're actually keeping that quality color in there. In addition to this, another way to save money is to just buy the paints that you need to buy. You don't need to buy every type of paint color. The video that I had called Perfect Color Mixing shows you that by having a basic 6, a warm and a cool red, a warm and a cool blue, a warm and a cool yellow, white and black really is going to get you everywhere you want to get to. And then as you have more money and you can buy more paint, you can buy some of your favorite colors and you don't have to remix them all the time. So that's also a way to save money. Just buy your basics, basic color. Now what happens when a color dries out? Well, in the case of this coarse pumice gel, if I look at it, it's getting a little dry. But it's still pretty wet. I can still stir it. It's still a usable product. So I can actually take water, and usually for this, when I'm adding it directly to a product, I'll use a filtered water, and I'll add a little bit of water, only a little at a time. I'll stir it, I'll feel it, and if it feels better, I've revived it, I'll stop and I'll use it. If not, I'll just keep adding a little bit more water at a time until I can get this product feeling as soft as I want it again. But what about the case of this crackle paste? I didn't even use it very much, but it's already very stiff. You can barely move it. Adding water to this is just not going to help, and unfortunately, I'm going to have to throw it out. So some products we can revive with water, and some we cannot. What I tend to do is, if I open a product and it looks like it's starting to get dried out, that's when I add the water. I can also add some thin medium, like the airbrush medium. That will help revive it too. But again, some of them just forget it. You're going to have to throw them out. I mentioned this in a previous video, is that I like to buy one large and one smaller container. I save money by buying the large, and then I can use this as I work. I'm opening a smaller amount each time, and then I can refill it from the larger container. That is a really great way of saving money. And one more thing that I found really helpful, a lot of the bottles of mediums and some of the glossy gels, I found that if I take some black electrical tape and wrap it around between the, right where the lid and the jar meet, wrap it around once or twice and cut it off, this actually helps keep the product wet longer. So some of the ones, the fast drying ones, like pastes, like the crackle paste and light molding paste, you might want to, as you use them, just replace this black electrical tape when you put it away again, and it'll really help to save your products.
So that was how can I save money? And our last question for my presentation is, and hopefully you can stay for the Q&A at the end, which is coming up soon. Our last question is there a limit to how much water can be added to acrylic? And to best answer this, I'm going to play another video excerpt from the course.
Look at why I would use water in my paint. I get all these really interesting effects. Look at these interesting effects you can get when you try to replicate watercolor by adding lots, not just a little bit of water. Here you can see them all swimming around on these different surfaces. And here's another one. Then when I use glossy surfaces, I get even more interesting results. And look at this one. If you're adding a lot of water, like 80%, and that's what I define as a wash, to your acrylic paint, according to Golden, if you use their paints, which are high quality, you will have no problem. You will not get delamination of that layer, and you won't have, that means that the paint would flake off. Everything's going to be fine. So here are 3 tips that you can use if you're worried about using a lot of water and you're worried that the paint won't hold up. If you're using a good quality paint like Golden, you don't have to worry. If you're using a cheaper quality brand, there's a couple things you can do. Here's an example of a wash, lots of water in the paint on this surface. And if I'm unsure about the quality of the paint and I want to make sure that I don't have a problem, all I have to do is take a gloss medium and put a layer of gloss medium on top. I'm just going to pour it on here. Take a brush, get rid of the water, and just apply it. Now I'm really sealing that whole layer, and I don't have to worry. There's nothing that's going to happen to that washy paint underneath. Of course, I waited till it dried, the paint, before I applied the gloss medium. So the first way is high quality paint. The second way to make sure that you can use lots of water in your paint without any problems is to just apply a gloss coat over it. Now I can just keep painting on it if I want. And the third way is to apply a custom ground, or make sure you're using an absorbent surface like watercolor paper. Even an inexpensive paint brand, when you add lots of water and you put it on an absorbent surface, then it'll sink into the surface, and the surface will help to protect. And here are some examples of my work where I use this process.
Okay, so let's just summarize. How can I make acrylic look and feel like oil? Well, we covered the three concepts: layering, refraction, and drying times. Number two, how can I make acrylic paint dry slower? Humidity and temperature control, adding retarder, using a slow drying medium, and we could add that into the paint, but we could also apply it to the surface first and work wet into it, and using gloss gels. Three, what's the best way to paint soft edges and blends? Using slow drying methods and working in layers like I demonstrated in the video. How can I save money? Use mediums, gels, and pastes to extend the paint. Get a large and a small container of your favorite products, so you're not always opening a large container. Well, large containers generally cost less. So if you pick your favorite products, just buy large containers, but then I like to buy a small one too, so that I'm always opening the small one and not letting the large one dry out. You can purchase only what you need: one medium, one gel, one paste, and then, as I had said in the video, 6 main colors plus black and white. And the last one, is there a limit to how much water can be added to acrylic? No, there is no limit. And adding a lot of water will create watercolor effects and other much more unusual, interesting effects when used in conjunction with customized grounds and surfaces. So we're almost ready for Q&A, but I'd like to take a moment, if you'll let me, and to let you know about my brand new 30 video course called The Best Acrylic Painting Course, and that's actually the name of the course. It has over 11 hours of video demos and instruction, and those clips that I showed before are from the course, without this red line in it. Earlier I mentioned that acrylic is an incredible medium because it can imitate all other mediums, but it can also go way beyond, and that's what this course is about. I cover everything for acrylic painting, the conventional and the unconventional. So the course basically addresses the questions that we have in this presentation. Other questions that it addresses are how to create texture and interesting surfaces, what is pouring, including the new popular cell pouring, how to make your work long-lasting, and how to best use mediums, gels, and pastes in combination with layers of paint. And to celebrate its new release, as I told you, I'm still celebrating. I'm so excited. It took me a long time and just got finished. So I wanted to thank you for coming for this presentation. I wanted to offer a free gift to the first 10 people who purchase it from this webinar. And that gift would be a 30-minute private online consultation with me using Zoom, so we can discuss any questions or artistic concerns you may have. So for more information about that course, just go to my website. And sorry for the shameless plug. I have another course, just two, that last one about acrylic, and this one, which is quite unusual. I just wanted to mention it. It's a very different format than the other one. Painting Excellence runs for 4 weeks, and the next one starts June 3 in a couple weeks. It's interactive, and this means you have me available online every day for feedback, answering questions, help with the assignments, whatever you need. And I created a brand new curriculum made to help you direct and evolve your style, your process, vision, path. So if you're feeling like you're ready for something new, you're feeling stuck, need new ideas and motivation, this course is going to give you what you need to take your work to the next level. So this course addresses questions that are different from the last course. So it's not about acrylic. Instead, it's about, well, questions like, how do I create the feeling of deeper space in my work? How can I combine pattern and graphic elements? How can I shift from realism to abstraction or the reverse? How can I tell when my painting is finished? Creating a push-pull visual movement in your work. Some past artists who took the course, one of their questions was, their work felt too diverse and they needed help directing their focus. So things like that. Again, you go to my website, and here's my homepage on my website. You just go to instruction, and it lists everything that I offer, which in addition to the courses, I offer private consultations. I have some hands-on workshops coming up. And I also have, if you go to instruction, there's a bunch of free painting videos there. You just scroll down into the bottom. And I also want to point out my blog has years of articles with free painting information as well. Thank you so much. I will send a recording to everybody. And I thank you for participating, and I hope we stay in touch. So goodbye, everybody, and I'm going to end the meeting.